Hello, and welcome to the Magic of Calvin and Hobbes, a fan celebration. My name is Ryan, and I am a self-proclaimed Calvin and Hobbes superfan and expert.
And my name is also Ryan, although most people call me Indy.
Welcome back to our next episode of The Magic of Calvin and Hobbes. Today we're going to be talking about the third of Calvin's alter egos, the hard-boiled detective Tracer Bullet, and I will say I've got a little cold or something going on, which may make my voice a little raspier and gruffer, which may actually be fitting for this episode. So,
It'll make
uh,
you sound hard boiled.
yeah, exactly. So we previously did an episode about Spaceman Spiff in episode 10 and Stupendous Man in episode 17, and they're pretty prominent. Now, before we get into Tracer Bullet, let me make our usual disclaimers. We're not affiliated with Bill Watterson or his syndicate. We can't actually show any of the comics we'll discuss, but we'll, as always, provide a blog post with the dates of publication of each comic we discuss and also the books and page numbers so that you can look them up in either Go Comics if you have a subscription or the books if you have them.
One last thing before we get started. As we've been saying, we are planning on doing a bonus trivia episode in which Indy and I try to stump each other. So if you would like to participate in that, please send your trivia questions to magiccnh@proton.me with the subject line trivia questions for Ryan if you want me to answer the questions, or trivia questions for Indy if you want Indy to answer the questions. And please submit those by August 31st.
So, like I say, we talked about Spaceman Spiff, we talked about Stupendous Man, and we've established that there are around 70-ish Spiff strips and around 40 Stupendous Man strips. So with that in mind, Indy, how many Tracer Bullet strips would you guess there are?
Okay, so if it's all right, I'm not going to guess in terms of strips, but I'll guess in terms of like arcs or tracer bullet overall appearances, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to guess there are 7 tracer bullet stories.
Okay. So you're going to be shocked. There are 3 Tracer Bullet stories
Only
and
3?
only 3 stories. And as we'll see, one of them actually only features Tracer Bullet in one strip across the entire story. So
That's
he's,
crazy. I am shocked. So as usual, like even thinking, oh, it may not be that many. I
yeah,
actually overestimate it. Man, it just thinking back, he feels like he's there more often than he is, I guess.
I know. When I was doing the research for this and I looked it up on a Calvin and Hobbes wiki, it said there were only 3 stories. And I was like, really? I mean, I know it's not that many, but I thought it was more than 3. But then I was trying to think, okay, I know there's this one, and this one. Yeah, I can't think of any more.
Wow.
And then I couldn't find any in the book. So yeah,
Really.
3
In
Tracer
our
Bullet stories.
hearts, there are more.
Yes, exactly. And so it makes a total of 13 strips that Tracer Bullet appears in.
Wow, that is amazing. That's again, even thinking, okay, it's probably fewer than I would guess. Like it was still fewer than I would guess.
Yeah, it just every time you got to like take it down a notch and then take it down another notch just to be safe. Uh,
Wow. Well,
yeah,
maybe that's fitting for the noir genre. It's
right.
everything is less, I don't know, less simpatico or less happy than you'd want it to be or something.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it
World's
is.
out to get us. There are only 3 tracer bullet strips. Walking through the rain, wishing there were more neon lights blinding our eyes. All
Yeah.
right. Anyway,
Dame
let's get
came into my office asking me to find another Tracer Bullet story.
yeah.
Yeah,
If only a pushy brunette would come to ask us to find one, then it would really be
that would be
appropriate.
motivating.
But we'll get into that soon.
Now, before we get into the strips, let's talk about who Tracer Bullet is. So, as we've said, he's a hard-boiled detective. These strips are done in the style of film noir, which I'll say, as far as I know, that's the style because I've watched exactly 0 film noir films. So I don't really know how well these strips capture the genre, but apparently neither did Bill Watterson. He said he doesn't know much about the genre. He's not. Here's a direct quote from him. In fact, he says, "I'm not at all familiar with film noir or detective novels, so these are just spoofs on the cliches of the genre."
Yeah, and it's funny because I have the exact same reaction. We're all in the same boat. Like reading the tracer bullet strips, they always kind of felt right. Like I always remember thinking like, oh yeah, this is totally like detective stories would be. But when I think about it, I'm like, I don't know that I've ever actually watched anything that was film noir. So yeah, maybe we've sort of seen parodies of this kind of thing from time to time, or maybe like the occasional odd clip here and there, and that's why it seems right. But it is funny,
Yeah.
like how, like even though neither of us nor Bill Watterson apparently really was familiar with film noir are like, oh yeah, no, this is exactly what this kind of story would be like, the way Calvin's
Yeah.
imagining it.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you the name of like one noir film. I think The Maltese Falcon is that genre,
Right.
but I'm not actually sure. And
Yeah, I
I
think
think
that's one of the
maybe,
most I think that's
yeah, that's
one of the most sort of iconic ones that's considered film noir.
yeah, it's like the famous one. And then I
Yeah.
think maybe Dick Tracy is kind of a spoof on that a little bit,
That
or
wouldn't surprise me. I want to say maybe Sam Spade was a famous character, I think played by
okay.
Humphrey Bogart in noir movies. I could be wrong. Listeners, if you're more familiar with film noir or film history in general, you can let us know. I think that's right. But
Yeah. But anyway, what we do know about Tracer Bullet is he's a private eye, as opposed to, say, a police detective or some someone with like government authority, right? He's for hire.
it says so on his door.
Yes, exactly. So that's how we know that to be true. So, which leads me to kind of a vague question, but can you think of another strip where Calvin says we know something to be true because the sign says so?
Yeah, that is a good question. I feel like that's familiar, maybe kind of the same way with the film noir. Like, and I was trying to think, so I know there's times where he says things like, "Oh, well, they couldn't say this if it wasn't true." I mean, he
Mhm.
says that about the horoscopes. I don't think that's what you're getting at here,
It's not the
though.
one I had in mind, although that's a similar. Yeah, the newspaper couldn't print it if it wasn't true.
Yeah. And then I started thinking like, occasionally Calvin himself will put up signs for him, like, historical marker, some 40 snowmen met a gruesome fate. I was like, um, yeah, I'm not sure if I can remember specifically that. I guess maybe my best guess would be there's one where he thinks he discovered a creek, so he's gonna put up a sign to say that, and then it turns out Hobbs already put up Hobbs Creek here, but
Yeah, but he spelled it Hobscrk.
yeah, which I find it amusing that Hobbs doesn't seem to be able to spell that well,
Yeah.
even his own name, because in one sense you would think his spelling might be, you know, equivalent to Calvin's, whereas Calvin, I think, seems to spell Hobbes' name correctly, but
When he spells Calvin's Creek correctly with the apostrophe and everything, so yeah.
that's true. Now that I think about it, so I wonder if Hobbes actually gets better later in the strip because when he's going to be Calvin's lawyer,
Mm,
briefly, he does write Hobbes Esquire, and I'm pretty sure he spells his name correctly in that one.
yeah, so he did learn.
Yeah.
Okay.
But this is getting us far afield, and I think maybe the short answer is no, I don't think I know the answer to that question.
Okay, fair enough. So there's a little story where Calvin is selling great ideas. He's got his cardboard box as his stand, and it just says "Great ideas, $1."
Okay.
And Hobbes comes up and says, "How do I know your ideas are great?" And Calvin says, "It says so on my sign. Want one?"
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
and who could argue with that, right? I mean,
exactly. So
yeah,
that's how we know it. That's how we know he's a private eye. That's how we know his ideas are great. Yeah.
okay. Oh, by the way, I'm sure you are going to know the answer to this, though, but do you know what his great idea was once one was purchased?
Well, one of them, so his mom purchased one when he was giving a reduction sale and selling them for only a quarter, and his great idea was buy some more.
Yes. I
But
believe that's the only example of a great idea we actually get from him in
well, there's
that. Is there another one?
there's kind of one more. Susie comes up and says something along the lines of, "You, why would I buy great ideas from you? Like your ideas can't be great." And he says, "Oh yeah, well go soak your head. Hey, that'll be $1."
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
Okay. All right, very
yeah,
good. So yeah, so you're right. It says so on the sign. These are great ideas, just like with Tracer Bullet. says he's a private eye right on his door, so we know that's
Yes,
what it is.
exactly. Now, Tracer Bullet, we can distinguish him from the other alter egos and such in part because he wears a fedora. And in this case, so, Spaceman Spiff, Calvin doesn't have any real world analogs to Spiff's outfit. The
Yeah.
closest we have is he has a dart gun that can represent Spiff's gun or squirt gun or whatever,
Okay. And
but he
then
doesn't ever wear the mask.
he does in one case have a model spaceship.
Yes,
So
that's true.
that's the other paraphernalia, you might say. Actually,
Yeah, so there are some
one
analogs.
would it be paraphernalium if it's only one thing, or is that?
Oh gosh, I don't know. We're gonna need like a linguist or something.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I'm thinking, well, paraphernalia, that sounds plural, so maybe it's one paraphernalium, two paraphernalia.
I would buy that.
Okay. Either way,
Uh,
though, moving on.
so yeah, so he has some objects that kind of represent Spiff, but he doesn't ever wear a Spiff mask or anything like
Right.
that. With Stupendous Man, he has the mask and the cape, and with Tracer Bullet, at least one time he has an actual fedora. It might be his dad's or something, but he has access to an actual hat that he can wear, and that's important for the story, as we'll see in a little bit.
Yes.
But the real hat isn't a requirement for Tracer Bullet. Most of the Tracer Bullet stories don't actually have that hat present when we snap to reality. In the fantasy world, he also often has a trench coat, which doesn't seem to be part of reality, at least in any of the Tracer Bullet stories. And sometimes, as the detective, he's just wearing a collared shirt and a tie. But we can always tell that he's Tracer Bullet because he has, in the fantasy world, the fedora on.
Right. And he looks more grizzled too.
Yeah, he does. And of course, the art gives it away. And we'll talk about the art a little more in a second, but it's a much darker feel. So you can also tell there. And also because he, tells you that he's Tracer Bullet and a private eye and all that stuff. But we'll get into the narration in a little bit. He carries a gun that is identified variously as a revolver and a 38. And I don't know if those are the same thing. I don't really know anything about guns. But when he calls it a 38, it looks like a revolver. And then in another strip, he says he has a Magnum, and also at some point he calls it a 45. So I guess he has a lot of guns, which, that's not surprising.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I don't know. Maybe he carries different guns on different days, or
Yeah,
which
maybe he
matches
upgraded.
his outfit better. That's probably
Yeah. Now, somewhat oddly for a typically family-friendly comic, Tracer Bullet drinks and smokes, like explicitly. So it's a little weird, I guess, but it fits the genre for sure.
yeah.
And
And
it's
now that we think about it, there's I believe two other references to smoking, particularly. I don't think we see anybody drinking in the strip other than potentially Tracer Bullet, unless you can think of one. Like there's
mm,
references to beer, but I don't
yeah.
know that we ever see anyone actually consuming alcohol.
The only possibility I can really think of is like when the parents are out and Rosalind is babysitting and we cut to a scene of the parents, there
Yeah.
may be like a glass of wine on the table, but it's not identified as wine.
Yes.
So
Yeah, that would be my best guess too. But
yeah.
yeah, there is at least one instance of someone smoking though, which I'm sure you know what that is.
Of course, that's the one where Calvin's mom lets him have a cigarette so that he can learn for himself why that's a terrible idea.
Yes, and Hobbes says, you'd think this would be an easy habit to break.
Yeah, and then the other reference to smoking I can think of is when Calvin tells his dad he should smoke cigars because they're all the rage, and mom says flatulence could be all the rage, but it would still be disgusting.
Yes,
Yeah.
well put, dear.
Yes. But in any case, it's in there. I don't think anyone is being encouraged to drink or smoke. It just fits the genre. And now, as we've established, Tracer Bullet doesn't appear in very many strips. So let's talk for a minute about why. And this will bring us to the art of Tracer Bullet. Here's what Watterson had to say. Tracer Bullet stories are extremely time consuming to write, so I don't attempt them often. Cartoonists don't use black much anymore. The eye, being lazy, is attracted to empty white space, especially when the panels are so small, and we miss some dramatic possibilities that way. which is too bad because the Tracer Bullet stories are awesome. But I get it. I mean, if you look at these stories, they are full of black, which takes a lot of time to color in, and very meticulously rendered. So I can see why it took him a long time to produce these stories.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I mean, I can see why they'd be so time consuming, and that's why he might not do them so often. But I agree, they look really cool. So,
Yeah.
like, I love the use of black and like the chiaroscuro effect with the, the dark and light sort of alternating patterns. And
Hmm.
yeah,
Like
I really
half of his
enjoy
face
all
is in
those.
shadow and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. They do look really cool, but it makes sense why it would take so long. It kind of reminds me of a semi-related joke on Saturday Night Live one time. And this was actually about a different comic. It was like they were interviewing the Peanuts gang, but obviously they had
Mm.
real people like pretending to be these people and talking
Mm.
about Charles Schultz. And I remember the one they had playing Franklin was like, yeah, I really appreciate him being willing to draw a person of color because most cartoonists are too lazy to do the shading.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So so yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it reminds me of that. Obviously, I don't think it has anything to do with it, but it's it's easy to see why the art, as cool as it is, would be kind of prohibitive to do very often.
Yeah. I mean, I know Watterson said that normally he could do the actual inking of 6 dailies in what would amount to a long day. And so I wonder, how long was that extended in Tracer Bullet stories? Did it take twice as long? You'd have to work on it for 2 days? Did it take even longer? I'd be curious to know how
Yeah,
that compared to a regular story arc.
I would too. It wouldn't surprise me if it was more than twice as long, honestly.
Yeah, because I mean, you can see there's a lot of work that goes into it.
Yeah, I wonder how it compares to, for instance, when some of the strips we talked about, I think in the art episode were done, like the one where it's like he's transferred to a photo negative, every color's the opposite of what it should be.
Yeah,
And then similarly, the one where like, oh no, the world has lost all its hue and chroma, and then it's all about, seeing things in black and white. Sometimes that's the way things are.
right.
Yeah, so I wonder how those would compare also.
Yeah, yeah, man. We got to get Bill Watterson on this show. We can ask him all these burning questions.
We do. So I'm sure we've said this before, but open invitation, Bill, if you're listening. So we would
Yeah,
love to have you.
just knock on some wood here or something.
Yeah.
uh,
Or
but
back to Tracer Bullet.
yes, so let's talk about the first story. So the first appearance of Tracer Bullet was on May 16th, 1987, as part of a story arc where Hobbs gives Calvin a haircut. So most of this arc isn't Tracer Bullet, but we've got to talk about the whole arc because it's hilarious.
Oh yeah.
So it's 10 days long, and we'll get to Tracer in several strips. But it starts off with Calvin complaining to Hobbs that barbers never cut his hair the way he wants. So when he tells Charlie to give him back his tip, we know what he's
Mhm.
talking about.
Oh yeah, and also when he tries to say what he wants, and this time it's Pete the barber. It's like, ma'am, give him the usual, Pete. So
Yes,
I understand Calvin's frustration here.
absolutely. So naturally, Hobbs does it, hoping that Mom will pay him $8. Which, by the way, remember when haircuts were only $8?
Yeah, vaguely. I actually remember when gas was less than $1 a gallon too.
I
So
know. Yeah, that was awesome.
yeah, that
But
was not as long ago as some of our listeners might think, actually.
yeah. Yeah, it's for the days. So Calvin, all he really wants is there's this part that sticks out in the back, which I'm not sure how you can tell which part is the part that sticks out with Calvin's haircut, but okay.
Yeah, I
But
mean, one that in particular sticks out a little bit. So the
right.
rest of it's fine. Yeah,
These ones are on purpose. I don't want this one, yeah.
yeah,
But so he wants that part just trimmed and tapered a bit. Hobbs, on the other hand, thinks that his hair should be real short, especially, oh, right here.
yeah. Don't you think it should be real short?
No, no. I think it should be real short. Are you trying to tell me something? No, I just think it looks like it should be real short. Oh, I love the implied problem. But I think maybe my favorite strip in the whole arc is when we get to this interchange where uh actually why don't we go ahead and do a dramatic reenactment? Indy, would you like to be Calvin or Hobbes?
Ooh, you know what? I will be Calvin.
All right, go ahead.
You made a mistake, didn't you?
No, I can cover it up.
Cover what up?
Nothing. It's not my fault if your head has funny bumps that make the scissors go screwy.
Your head's gonna have funny bumps in a minute if you don't tell me what you did.
Oops, hold still.
Why'd you say oops? What'd you do now?
Nothing. Let's try parting your hair from ear to ear. Everything about that back and forth makes me laugh. It just escalates every panel.
Oh yeah. And I always maybe there's just me not understanding haircuts or something, which is maybe a weird thing to say, but when he says, let's try parting your hair from ear to ear, I was never entirely clear on what that was even supposed to mean.
Yeah, I would like to see what that would look like.
Okay, so it's not just me then. I'm like I know what a part looks like, obviously, but parting from ear to ear, yeah, that one seems a little tricky.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that works, but I like the idea. Very creative, Hobbes. So now, not to worry, because according to Hobbes, Calvin's haircut is sort of new wave, and more specifically, sort of punk, actually.
Like a mohawk?
In some places, it's sort of like a mohawk.
Yeah, in some places it's sort of like that's
And
kind of
Calvin's
like
like,
the character reference where Calvin tries to be sort of good if he's
yeah,
not tempted otherwise.
exactly. So Calvin says, I want a mirror. And Hobbes goes, you know what's the rage this year? Hats. And here we see either the fabled fedora or at least another hat that looks kind of like the fedora. Hobbes is holding a hat, like, here you go. And then,
It's interesting that that was within arm's reach too.
yes,
It's like, well, I wonder if Hobbes had this as a backup plan the whole time.
better have this ready just in
Yeah.
case. Yeah. But then we get the results of Calvin's haircut, which so Calvin says that it looks like his head got attacked by a weed eater, which I think is a pretty accurate description.
Yes.
And Watterson says that he rarely laughed out loud when he was drawing, but this one, the results of Calvin's haircut got him, and he laughed when he drew it. So, and
I
it's
can
a really funny drawing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to think of too, because obviously, he's the expert. He draws Calvin a certain way every time. This is how Calvin looks, and then it's like, well, now I'm changing it in this fairly dramatic way, and so yeah, I think that's kind of cute actually that he made himself laugh at that.
Yeah, agreed. So just to describe it, Calvin is almost completely bald, but you see just these little wisps of hair sticking up in a few places. And
Ironically, because that was the whole problem, something kind of sticking up a little bit.
yeah, and so he's like, I've got to go around looking like I've got mange, and Hobbes gives him the solution of wrapping his head in some sort of cloth turban style, and he says, how's this sort of a Lawrence of Arabia look? And Calvin's response is,
Lobotomy patient look.
so listeners, you decide which one is it. But now we finally get to Tracer Bullet. So in the next strip, he introduces himself by saying, the smoke of my cigarette mixed with the smoke of my 38. If business were as good as my aim, I'd be on Easy Street. Instead, I've got an office on 49th Street and a nasty relationship with a string of collection agents. I'm Tracer Bullet. I'm a private eye. This is where he says, it says so on my door. He
I just
says,
love that narration. I'm a private eye. It says so on my door.
and then, yeah, I just love the narration in Tracer Bullet. He's like, I got 8 slugs in me. One's lead and the rest are bourbon. The drink packs a wallop and I pack a revolver. Just so many great lines. And then he says that a brunette comes in, or excuse me, he says, in walked trouble, brunette as usual. Then we snap to
It's
reality with
true.
definitely true. And we snap to reality with Calvin wearing his fedora at the dinner table and mom telling him to take it off for dinner. And Calvin in his head is going, she was a pushy dame, but she had a case. So kind of reminds me of when he was Stupendous Man with his mask for the first time. He was wearing his cowl at the table and mom tells him to take it off.
And it's also the first instance of one of my favorite parts of Tracer Bullet strips, and that's where we see Calvin in the real world still narrating the Tracer Bullet story in his head,
Yes.
often with matching expressions. So, like a very Tracer Bullet esque expression sort of uncharacteristic of what you might expect from Calvin normally. So you can tell, like, with the look on his face, it's like he's really thinking this, or really
Yeah.
feeling like this is happening in real life.
Yeah. So he's in the headspace of Tracer Bullet here. And that's the only strip in this whole arc where we actually see Tracer Bullet. In the next
Right.
strip, Mom is telling him to take the hat off again, but he's just drawn as Calvin, and he's thinking to himself, I think he's kind of gotten out of the Tracer Bullet headspace because he's thinking to himself, here comes the hurricane. So he takes it off. Mom sees the result of his haircut and says, "You cut your hair? No, I didn't cut my hair. Hobbs did. Why on earth would you cut your hair? I didn't do it. I said it was Hobbs. You think I'd do this?" Mom just gives him a look.
Yeah. Which, and this isn't the first time that Hobbs has done something that Calvin was blamed for. So again, parents never listen. It's like, what, weren't you listening? I said Hobbs did it, not me.
Yeah. And I love that he says, "You think I'd do this?" And Mom just goes like, "Really, kid?" And
Yeah,
Calvin's like,
really.
"Well, I didn't."
That's almost like when he spontaneously falls over backwards in class in his chair, and then he goes, "It could have happened by accident."
Exactly. Yes. So Mom obviously is upset that Calvin or someone has uh, completely destroyed Calvin's hair like this. Hobbs, meanwhile, is upset that he got stiffed out of his $8.
Which
Calvin is not pleased that that's what Hobbs is worried about.
yeah, and I'm not sure Hobbs is super sincere about that, as opposed to just taking the chance to get a rise out of Calvin, because I don't know,
Yeah.
he's running away from Calvin after that. It seems like he expected this reaction.
Yeah, it's kind of he's not going hoo 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 like he does sometimes, but it's kind of the same energy.
Yeah, the who is implied, I think.
Yes. Now, Hobbes does have a solution for Calvin's problems. You remember what the solution is?
Yeah, so it's easy, right? You just take a yellow marker, which I think Hobbes says that he bought, which is interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, so and it's easy to kind of just read over, but it's like, huh, okay, Hobbes bought this marker. All right,
Yeah.
well, setting that aside is a yellow marker, so we're just going to draw hair on Calvin's head, which is kind of funny in a meta way because that usually is what happens. But
Right.
in the strip itself, presumably that's not what happens. So yeah, so then we get this nice yellow-headed version of Calvin, even though it doesn't stick up like it used to.
Right. And so he's actually pretty happy with the result and he walks off all confident, but then we don't actually see him show his mom, but apparently it didn't go well because he winds up in the bath trying to scrub the stuff off and Hobbs is like, "Uh-oh, does it come off?" So for all we know, once his hair grows back, he still has that marker on his head.
That's true. Probably
But
not. But
yeah. But being a comic strip, his hair grows back very quickly, and after this arc is over, his hair is back to normal. So that's good
which,
for Calvin.
yeah, which is interesting. I wonder if Watterson ever considered having a few strips where it was still that way, or was in the process of growing back, or
Could have lent itself to some humor, but I can also see why he maybe didn't take it that direction.
yeah, maybe
Yeah.
there's a time lapse.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we don't really need to worry about how time works in a strip that ran for 10 years, but the main character is 6 the whole time and has multiple Christmases. So,
Yeah,
you
I don't
know.
think we even ever talked about that before.
Oh, yeah, has that come up? But, um,
Now that we think about it, yeah. No. The other thing that makes me wonder is if Tracer Bullet was always intended to appear more than once, or if at this point it was just kind of a throwaway gag and
yeah.
he wasn't necessarily considering having him come back.
Yeah, I don't know. So that story was in May of 1987, and the next appearance of Tracer Bullet is February of 1990. So that's a pretty good chunk of time between Tracer Bullet stories. And I kind of wonder if it was, okay, I'm using him for this story just as a one off. And then later he was like, you know what? I've got an idea and brought Tracer Bullet back.
Yeah.
That's kind of my gut intuition. Obviously, I could be wrong, but that'd be my guess.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. And
Yeah.
probably those intervening 3 years are where those other four Tracer Bullet stories would have been if he had always been planning to have him come back.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So, like I say, the next one is February 1990. It starts with Calvin taking a quiz at school, and it's a math problem. So, Jack and Joe drive toward each other at 60 and 30 miles per hour, respectively. They pass each other after 10 minutes, and the question is, how far apart did they start? And so then we snap to Tracer Bullet saying it was another baffling case, but then you don't hire a private eye for the easy ones. And so that's how we start this story. And as an aside, in middle school, my algebra teacher printed out this whole story on a double-sided sheet of paper for each of us, and had us figure out how to solve the problem. So he whited out Susie's answer at the end of the arc, and we were supposed to write the answer in there. Now, of course, I, being the Calvin and Hobbes geek that I am, already knew the story, so I knew what the answer was going to be, but I did still dutifully show my work.
Now, in addition to showing your work, though, I guess maybe we'll say before reading the strip, did you try to solve the problem in your head before you got to the end of it?
I think I did, yeah.
Mhm.
And I didn't know how to do like actual algebraic solving, but I was just kind of like, well, after this many minutes, Jack will have gone this far and Joe will have gone this far, and just kind of ratcheted it up until, kind of like on a diagram until they passed.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the same with me actually. So as a kid, I remember trying to think before I got to the end, like, oh, what would the answer to this be? And doing kind of a similar process to you. So
Yeah.
yeah, I thought that was fun. That also, in a semi-related way, there was this online comic that I read sometimes, and there was a story arc where one character got aphasia, so she couldn't speak normally,
Mm,
but the artist did have her saying sensible things, but he did it with like a cipher. So
okay.
if you paid attention, you could actually figure out what it was she was supposed to saying if you figured out the right substitution for it. And I actually thought this was fun, so I would look forward to this, and when a new strip came out, I try to figure out what she was saying. Now apparently some people hated this, and they wanted translations online for it, but I actually enjoyed it trying to figure out what it was. But
That's interesting. It reminds me, are you at all familiar with the Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians books?
no, but that sounds awesome.
It is awesome. So it's by Brandon Sanderson, if you're familiar with
Oh,
his work.
okay.
And it's about this kid named Alcatraz. It's sort of a discovered world story where he discovers he learns that he's part of this broader world where certain people have kind of magical abilities. They call them talents.
Okay.
And but these talents are all things that if you frame them the right way, they really don't seem like talents. They seem more like curses. For instance, Alcatraz's talent is the ability to break things. And,
Hmm.
so that sounds bad, but if you break the right things, it can be an advantage.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, like, I don't want to give too much away, but anyway, one of the people in the story has the talent of saying things that make absolutely no sense. And basically, again, I don't want to spoil it in case anyone wants to read it and has it, but it turns out that there's a way for that to be useful, that it doesn't make sense, but it actually ends up being important. I'll just leave it
Okay.
at that. So,
That does sound fun.
yeah, so Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians, if anyone wants to give that a look.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, that sounds good. I like the I kind of like the genre, if we want to call it that, of everyone has this sort of unique ability and then how that interplays. Because I've with that, I can think of at least like two other story series where that's kind of a foundational plot point. And those usually end up being fun, and in part for the sort of things you say, like things that maybe sound like they're not so great in the first place, or that they are. If there's a creative way you think of it, then it actually is very helpful, or maybe things that should be helpful are actually curses. So
Yeah,
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 again, maybe calling that a genre is overstating it, but those sorts of stories I have tended to enjoy. So that sounds pretty cool.
yeah. So, yeah, give that one a look.
All right.
But coming back to Tracer Bullet, so we've got this math problem. There's at least one other instance in Calvin and Hobbes where he gets a problem like this. Can you think of another case?
So the one that I can think of is, yeah, it's similar. With this, it's framed as, I think, not Jack and Joe, but it's like you and a friend start driving towards each other at 5 o'clock, and if you go this fast or you're this far apart, how long will it take? Something like that. And then Calvin's answer is, well, given the traffic around here at 5 o'clock, who knows?
Yeah, I always catch these trick questions.
Yeah, which I want to say actually, I know that's played off as a joke or like Calvin not understanding what he's supposed to do, but I want to make the case that he's right
I
because,
agree.
yeah, because, okay, they say this happens at 5 o'clock. They don't say, assume normal traffic conditions or assume no other cars on the road or blah blah blah. They don't set up the conditions, so you have all these sort of counterfactual, things that would be true or false potentially, which would affect what the answer is.
Yeah, absolutely. It actually makes me think there's a foxtrot where Jason is given a problem like that. I think it's two trains going towards each other. And so, Jason is really, really good at math, but
Mhm.
he writes down, well, assuming that they're both traveling, on parallel tracks and ignoring the curvature of the earth and ignoring the effect of relativity and assuming that they're starting in the same time zone and, all of these assumptions that would have to be true for the answer to work out the way the teacher means for the answer to work out. And then he puts whatever the answer is. And so then he's handing in his homework and it's this huge stack of papers. So,
Yeah, and not just because Jason really likes doing math, but because no, that is what is required to give an accurate answer.
exactly. Yep.
Yeah,
He's
I think only Jason, unless someone else did it, should be given full credit there. Like if anyone else just gave the lazy answer with all the unstated assumptions, that should be worth, only partial credit.
right. They didn't show all their work. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So again, so Calvin, I think, is actually on the right track here, no pun intended. So
Yes. Yeah. So coming back to the Tracer Bullet story, now we get this whole monologue about who Tracer Bullet is. He says that he wanted to have a day off with a couple of buddies, specifically, oh, I don't have it in front of me, but he's referring to his one travels in a holster and the other in a hip flask. So those are the buddies that he wanted to spend the day with. He tells us that his name is Tracer Bullet, though what everyone calls him is another matter. This is where he says he's a private eye. It says so on his door.
oh, okay.
And then, anyway, a dame comes in with a case. She was persuasive. Dames usually are. I told her it would be 50 greenbacks a day plus expenses. And we see Miss Wormwood talking to Calvin saying, get to work, Calvin. And he's got his feet up on his desk.
Yeah, and this is another case where we get the tracer bullet expression in real life. So yeah, like you said, he's got his feet up on his desk. He's got his like hands behind his head, and he has this really sort of determined, decisive expression on his face as he's thinking, "Oh, it'd be 50 greenbacks a day plus expenses." So
Yeah.
to me, that's one of the most charming things of the tracer bullet strips.
Yes, I agree. And so actually on that note, the next strip is, as far as if I've done my homework correctly, this is the only Tracer Bullet strip where the entire strip is Tracer Bullet. There's no snap to reality on this one. So here he's on the case and he's asking himself questions. Who are these mugs? What are they trying to accomplish? Why is Jack in such a hurry? And what difference does it make where he started from? And I think those are all fair questions, first of all. But
They are, and my favorite is why is Jack in such a hurry? Because
yeah,
then that really makes it feel like a detective thing. It's like, oh no, there's more than meets the eye here. Like, what was this guy running from, or what did he have to hide, or
he's
like,
going twice as fast as Joe. What's the deal? Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I really love that particular question about it.
Yeah. And then in the last panel, he says something like, I had a feeling that by the end of the day, I'd be sorry I asked. And so that whole strip is just Tracer Bullet's point of view. That must have been a lot of work to draw. So then in the next strip, he says that he's decided he would try the Durkin's dame. She has a face that suggests someone upstairs has a weird sense of humor. He also says she has a head for numbers and not much else, but maybe she has something on Jack and Joe. The question is, will she sing? And will she?
No, she won't. In fact, she insists that Tracer Bullet do his own work instead of trying to copy hers.
Exactly. So The Durkin's dame was no good.
Doesn't he say something like, I knew Susie and shutting her up would have taken some doing or something like
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, so he says the Durkin's dame was no good. I needed a clue and a drink. One of them I knew where to find, and so he's going off to get a drink at the water fountain. But then a gorilla pulled him into an alley, squeezed him into an accordion, and played a polka on him with brass knuckles. And so it's Miss Wormwood pulling him back into the classroom, saying, "You've had enough drinks." But I love the description of squeezing him into an accordion and playing a polka with brass knuckles. So then, after coming to, he says everything fell into place. It must be the only number big enough to keep Susie quiet, like you say, what could possibly shut Susie up? She never
that.
stops talking. But the only number big enough to keep Susie quiet and want me out of the picture, Mr. Billion. So that's his answer, 1 billion. He doesn't put units, so I guess he could be right. Maybe it's a billion
Ooh.
micrometers or something, but
I mean, I'm sure there's a theoretical unit which multiplied to a billion could be the correct answer, but probably
yeah, I
not
don't
a
know what it is.
standardly used unit.
Probably not, and I think it's implied that we're supposed to be giving our answer in miles.
Yeah,
But
that one might be allowable because I think it does say in miles per hour. So
yeah, so the correct answer, which Susie gets, turns out to be 15 miles. Now, Susie doesn't give the units either, but hey, it's first grade. Like this is already a pretty complicated problem for first grade. So
but you don't
anyway,
hire private eyes for the easy ones.
exactly. And that's the end of the second story. So we're already most of the way through all of the tracer bullet that is in Calvin and Hobbes.
Man,
But
crazy.
yeah, but it's a great story. I love the art. I love Tracer Bullet's narration of the events that are going on. It's so heavy-handed, and it's
Hmm.
awesome.
Yeah. Now I do wonder about the description of the Durkin's name. So, she had a face like someone upstairs had a funny sense of humor or something. Like there's evidence to suggest Calvin actually thinks Susie is cute. So I don't know how seriously we should take that.
I think this is a case of methinks he doth protest too much.
Yeah, exactly. Also,
Yeah,
the head for numbers and not much else. That doesn't seem right either. It
yeah, no,
generally
that's
gets the
not true at
impression
all.
Susie's just an all-around good student. So
There's a one of the early comics where Calvin directly says that he's flirting with Susie. His flirtation with her is saying something like, "Is that your head, or did a possum die in your collar?" Something like that.
that's
So
true.
saying that her face suggests someone upstairs has a weird sense of humor may kind of also be how he flirts.
That's true. I think there's also the one like, "You're so ugly. I hear your mom puts a paper bag over your head before she kisses you goodnight." So
Right, yeah. So that's how that's their terms of endearment or something.
it's shameless the way they flirt. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, the last Tracer Bullet story, and it's crazy that this is already the last one, comes
Yeah.
about a year later, February of 1991.
Wow. Which then also means there were like 4.5 years or more without any tracer bullet stories
Yeah,
after the end of it.
yeah. Now that does include sabbaticals, but even so,
That's true.
uh, so this one starts with mom finding an overturned end table and a broken lamp, and she yells, "Who did this?" And so Tracer Bullet narrates the dame's scream hit an octave usually reserved for calling dogs. Uh,
But I also like to say, who did this? It's like, is that a real question, or like, does she have any other potential suspects other than Calvin? Because I'm not sure who it would
I
be.
Yeah, I think there's really only one suspect here, at least that mom would be aware of.
That's
We'll
true.
we'll learn more about that as the case progresses, though.
Yeah, she may
So,
be unfairly prejudiced here.
yeah. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
So we see that Tracer Bullet is in his office now, and he tells us that he keeps two magnums in his desk. One's a gun, and he keeps it loaded. The other's a bottle, and it keeps me loaded. I'm a professional snoop. It's a tough job, but it pays the bills, specifically bill my bookie and bill my probation officer. Again, just fantastic narration. So in
Yeah.
comes mom with the case, and so he says his heart does a few calisthenics. I guess she bursts through the door, and then he takes the job. And again, this is narration where we see Calvin, who's on his bed reading a comic book, and he's jumping in the air, and but he's still narrating as Tracer Bullet.
Yeah. Well, that's what I thought. Given that Tracer Bullet has a probation officer, I wonder what he was arrested for in the past.
That is a good question. Yeah, and how he's allowed to be a private eye if he's on probation. But
Yeah. Or maybe while doing private investigations, he, you know, skirted the law a little bit, or
yeah, it could be. Yeah.
maybe did some gray legally things, and maybe that's why. So it could be related to being a private eye.
Yeah, I think that's plausible.
Yeah.
Now, he tells us that the dame sounds like a case herself, but he can't be picky. She was the pushy type who might break your heart or maybe your arms. She was hysterical. Dames usually are. And so then we come back to reality, and mom is kind of pointing at the broken lamp, and what have you got to say for yourself? And what does Calvin say?
I think he says, "Shh, I'm looking for clues."
Yes, and I think he also says, "Don't touch anything. I'm looking for clues." So as he's searching for clues, he says he hears the sound of a loaded 38 being cocked behind his head. Focused his thoughts like only a 38 can. So it turns out it was a setup. So he
Yeah, she
decides
didn't
to write.
really want to solve the crime. She just wanted a patsy to pin it on.
Exactly. So he decides to write a new ending to this case with his 45 as co-author. So he's unloading, which is his dart gun. So here he has an actual prop, and he tells us that he introduces a dame to a friend who he keeps, or a friend who's close to his heart, a little down and left to be specific. My friend is an eloquent speaker, and so he says it makes three profound arguments, and he leaves. Well, because he always leaves when the talk gets philosophical.
Right, which we didn't bring up in the philosophy in Calvin and Hobbes episode we did about the philosophical eloquence of shooting.
Yeah,
But
we missed that one.
yeah, I
Can't
guess we
believe that
could
one
have
didn't
brought
get in
that
there.
up.
Yeah. So, and of course, like I say, in reality, it's Calvin's dart gun. So
Yeah,
now he's really in trouble. Although it seems that he missed with all three shots.
yeah, maybe out of panic.
That could be.
Yeah,
So,
Tracer Bullet said he has good aim, but I guess not in this case.
well, yeah, I mean, he was startled. So what can you do? But he says he's put all the puzzle pieces together, but then the dame's hired goon, Dad, jumps out of nowhere and practices for his chiropractic degree with what appears to be a lead pipe. I don't know. We see, these giant hands holding something, and it seems like the lead pipe from Clue or something like that.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I always thought it was, although it's maybe smaller than you would expect it to look, at least relative to the side of the goon's hand.
Yeah,
But yeah,
big
I would
enough to still
agree.
hurt.
It would still hurt, yeah. But yeah, I always assumed it was some kind of pipe.
Yeah. So what's actually happening, of course, is Dad is giving Calvin a lecture, and Calvin has this disgusted look on his face. And he continues his Tracer Bullet narration. He says that what this is to him is an all percussion symphony playing in his head, and it went on a 10 city tour of his brain, and he has a season pass with front row seats.
Is this
So,
also where like he says like this might have been in the previous one actually, but it's like he's supposedly knocked out as Tracer Bullet, and he's like, fortunately, my last thought turned the lights out when it left.
yeah, I think that's the same one.
Okay.
Yep. I can't remember if it's that one or the one where Miss Wormwood drags him back into the class. But yeah, he talks about how there was like fireworks going off in his head, but fortunately the last whatever in his brain turned out the lights when it left.
Yeah.
Uh, but he does now know who the culprit is. However, the dame is no longer his client, so he feels no need to divulge the information. So, Indy, who was it?
So we don't actually find out who, but Tracer Bullet tells us it was actually a buddy of his.
Right.
So, right. So he felt no need to divulge that information, as you said. Now, we do see Hobbs kind of tossing a football to himself and saying, I guess we should have played outside, huh?
Right.
So yeah, so
Which
Tracer
could
Bullet
be
never tells
unrelated.
us, but
I mean, it's possible there's no connection there. Maybe Hobbes was just making an observation, but uh,
yeah, this is only circumstantial evidence, really.
exactly.
Yeah, but I
So,
do think it's interesting though. This does mean that, first of all, it doesn't seem like Calvin was the culprit. And from that point of view, his mom was trying to pin the crime on a patsy instead of really solving who did it.
exactly. Yeah. So this was another case of parental injustice.
Exactly. And that's probably maybe not parental so much, but I do think that kind of an unjust world is sort of a typical plot point of film noir. So that would
Okay.
fit in pretty well.
Yeah, that's true. So that's all the Tracer Bullet stories. So, I wish there were more because they're fun, but I totally get why Bill Watterson only attempted them a couple of times. But I love the art, I love the writing, and real quick, I think we need to compare Tracer Bullet to the other alter egos a little bit more. So, in episode 10, we determined that Spiff shows up when Hobbs isn't around, and that Hobbs probably doesn't even know about Spiff because Spiff's job is to deliver Calvin from boredom, which when Hobbs is around, he's got Hobbs to do that.
Right. Yeah, and that's it's not something I really thought about growing up, but it is kind of wild that yeah, Hobbs may not even know that Spaceman Spiff exists.
Yeah. And then we know that Hobbs definitely knows about Stupendous Man because
Oh yeah.
he directly asks Calvin, has Stupendous Man ever won a battle and stuff like that.
Well, not
And
only that, I mean, we see Hobbs is around when Calvin is talking about Stupendous Man or transforming into Stupendous Man. So yeah, they
right.
actually frequently discuss Stupendous Man's adventures.
Yeah. So kind of opposite ends of the spectrum with Spiff and Stupendous Man there. And Stupendous Man seems to show up when there's a tyrannical scheme happening that Calvin can't deal with himself, whether it be cookies that need to be liberated, or homework, or the annoying girl who is walking while being female, or, whatever.
Yeah,
So,
whatever dastardly crimes are afoot.
yeah, Stupendous Man helps with those. So, Tracer Bullet. Does Hobbs know about Tracer Bullet? I'm not sure because the only instance of a Tracer Bullet story where Hobbs is present and Calvin is doing Tracer Bullet narration is that last panel where Hobbs is tossing the football to himself, and
Mhm.
Calvin is narrating it in his head. It's a thought, it's a thought balloon, not a speech bubble. So I don't know if Hobbs is aware of Tracer Bullet or not. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting because before I think I would have said, oh, yeah, he does kind of based on that. But you're right. It is internal narration and not something he says to Hobbes. So I guess I still kind of lean towards him knowing about him because it would make sense if Hobbes was aware of Calvin supposedly looking for clues, or he certainly seemed to know what was going on when he's saying, "Oh, I guess we should have played outside." So it's at least plausible. Maybe a little bit with the first instance too, where it's like, okay, well, give me that hat to cover up my head at least, and like, oh,
Right.
now I'm Tracer Bullet, the hard-boiled detective. I don't know. So you're right. We don't know for sure, but I think it's at least reasonable that Hobbs knows about Tracer Bullet.
Yeah. So I'm going to make a couple of cases, kind of one for each side of the argument here.
Okay.
So, in making the comparison to Stupendous Man doesn't exist in some alternate fantasy world. Not really. He seems to exist in the quote unquote real world, where Hobbs is present and he's fighting Babysitter Girl and liberating cookies. And so it makes sense that Hobbs would be aware of that because that's all part of the same reality
Yes.
where Hobbs lives. Whereas Tracer Bullet seems to be a separate reality, if that makes sense. Like, we're going to a completely different world, a completely different setting. the bad guy is not Miss Wormwood, it's a gorilla.
Right.
It's the dame's hired goon. So that kind of leads me towards this is a separate reality that Hobbs isn't really a part of. So maybe 1 point in that favor. But on the other hand, in the reality of Tracer Bullet, he specifically refers to the Durkins dame, which
That's true.
suggests that Susie is in some way part of Tracer Bullet's reality, which means that Hobbs could be. So
Yeah.
I'm tying myself in knots here, and it doesn't really matter. But basically, I could go either way.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, like I said, it's really not conclusive either way. I think we could kind of we could make a case as you did for both sides. Maybe a sort of compound question on that might be like, could Hobbs be aware of Tracer Bullet in some sense, but not completely? So what I
Yeah,
mean
like
by
not part
that
of the
is,
story or something.
yeah, I mean, so maybe he has an idea that, Calvin calls himself Tracer Bullet when he's playing detective or something, but he doesn't know about him as like an alter ego per se.
Yeah, because so it seems to me like Hobbs doesn't usually get pulled into Calvin's, for lack of a better word, deep fantasies. Like,
Hmm.
I mean, one might make the argument that Hobbes is a fantasy, and I think that's heresy, but one could make that argument.
That's
And
absurd.
yeah, but so we've talked before about how Hobbes does see the snow goons as being alive. He does seem to be aware of Galaxoid and Nebular, stuff like that.
Right.
But when Calvin is in a completely different world, most of the time Hobbes isn't there. The only exception I can think of is when Calvin is the Tyrannosaur and he faces off against the savage saber-toothed tiger. But other than that, and even there, Hobbes isn't really pulled into the fantasy. It's Calvin seeing Hobbes as that, but then as soon as he wakes Hobbes up,
Yeah.
Hobbes ain't playing. He's angry. So
Exactly. Yeah, I hear. So that actually kind of gives me another idea about the whole thing too. And it's like, I don't know if this is going to make sense or not, but do you think there's a difference between sort of some of the fantastical elements of the strip that we would still think of as real or are real to Calvin versus a kind of playing pretend that is, explicitly acknowledged as playing pretend?
yeah, I kind of do see it that way actually. I hadn't really thought of it in those terms, but now that you bring it up, I think Spaceman Spiff, like Calvin knows Spaceman Spiff is a fantasy. You
Right.
know, he seems to be clearly aware that he's imagining stuff when he's Spiff. And mm, Stupendous Man, he may feel is a little more real because he does seem to think he can take on a babysitter who's like 11 years older than him. Um, and
And quite a bit bigger.
yeah, but when he's pretending to be a dinosaur, he maybe is in his head like, yeah, I'm totally a dinosaur right now, but he knows he's not really a dinosaur.
Yeah.
With Hobbes, Hobbes is alive. Like, as far as
Right.
Calvin is concerned, Hobbes is real. There's no pretending there.
Yeah.
So,
So yeah, I think that's right. And so like to kind of to kind of go on with the, pretending to be a dinosaur thing too, like I might make this kind of distinction. If Calvin transmogrifies himself into an animal, then he really is that animal for that time.
yes.
But he could pretend to be an animal and like, no, oh yeah, I'm just pretending to be the animal too. So I think there's like different levels of the fantasy versus pretend thing. And so the reason why I thought that might be relevant here is I wonder if Hobbs could be aware of Tracer Bullet on sort of the pretending level as opposed to the sort of real fantasy level.
Yeah. Yeah, I would go with that. I think Hobbes could be aware that Calvin pretends to be a detective sometimes, but yeah, that is not a maybe even because to Calvin, Tracer Bullet isn't real, to Hobbes, Tracer Bullet is just Calvin playing pretend. as
Yeah,
opposed to the Snow Goons, where to Calvin, the Snow Goons are real, therefore to Hobbes, the Snow Goons are real.
exactly. And just like Stupendous Man is real, at least to a certain level, so that's real to Hobbes. And yeah, and the
Yeah.
transmogrification and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that would make sense. And I think too, I hadn't really thought about it till really just a couple of minutes ago. But yeah, I think that makes sense as a way to view the strip. There's like different levels of pretending. There's the sort of real fantasy, and there's the explicitly pretend fantasies.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So, listeners, what do you think? Does Hobbes know about Tracer Bullet? What do you think about different levels of fantasies in Calvin and Hobbes? But before we end, I guess I'll say we've said that Spaceman Spiff shows up when Calvin is bored and Hobbes isn't around. Stupendous Man shows up when there's some sort of tyranny. I think Tracer Bullet, kind of obvious to say, but shows up when there's a mystery to be solved.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether that's what Jack and Joe are up to, or who broke the lamp, or why Calvin has a bad haircut.
Yeah,
So
and not only what they're up to, but why. Which, and again, it almost we were kind of getting on this before with oh, this is a trick question. Who knows what the traffic is like? It almost shows Calvin is sort of a deeper thinker than he gets credit for, because he's not just paying attention to sort of the surface thing that he's being asked about. He's like, well, what's a more sort of holistic understanding? Not that he would phrase it in those words probably, but
he
yeah,
might.
yeah, I mean, he might, but yeah, but that's something I find kind of interesting about the strip too. And I mean, we've said before how even though Calvin's not the greatest student, he does seem to be pretty intelligent, and I think
Right.
that's another dimension of this.
Yeah. He maybe gets a little lost in the sauce, and that distracts him from the actual task that he's supposed to be completing, but he is actually thinking about stuff.
Yeah, yeah, more so than a lot of people would.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, any other thoughts you'd like to share about Tracer Bullet?
Man, I mean, now that I know that there were only 3 strips, how many more thoughts could there be, right? No, but
Right.
yeah, I mean, like we said, I find these so charming, especially the real life expressions, like I mentioned before. So, yeah, those are just a delight, and like we've been saying, it's a shame there weren't more of them because they're a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, listeners, any thoughts you'd like to share about Tracer Bullet or anything else? We always love to hear from you. And you can reach out to us at magiccandh@proton.me. That's MAGICCANDH@proton.me.
And as always, there are no ads for this podcast, and it's completely free. So we hope you'll share your thoughts with us about Tracer Bullet, the other alter egos, or anything else about Calvin Hobbes or that we talk about. So come along with us.
Absolutely. Come along, let's solve some mysteries, and let's go exploring.
You've been listening to The Magic of Calvin and Hobbes, a fan celebration. We'll be releasing 40 episodes all throughout the year, from November 18th, 2025 to November 18th, 2026, to celebrate the 40th anniversary. Our intro and outro music is Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, referenced in the Calvin and Hobbes strip published on October 8, 1986. This rendition was performed by the Skidmore College Orchestra and made available under a Creative Commons license on museopen.com. We hope you'll join us next episode for more fun.